So, did you know that Canada ranks 64th in the world for women's representation in national parliaments? That's in the world. And that is why we have the incredible Shari Graydon here today from Informed Opinions. They recently launched their campaign called Balance the Power across Canada. And we're honored to have Shari here to share about why it is so critical that women's voices are represented in arenas of influence, both in media and politics. And we'll be opening the floor for questions from the audience. We have our Q&A feature turned on at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so you can share any questions as they come up. And I will also be watching the chat for any questions that you might have there as well. So let's use the chat right now for a quick check-in. I'd love to have you share about you and your business and share how you're coming to this event today. Are you energized, distracted, sporadic, or excited? Whatever it is, pop it in the chat and share about your business, and let's have a quick conversation there. And as you know, this event is being recorded and we will be sharing this publicly post-event. Closed captions are also turned on, so please feel free to click the closed captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We also have a couple polls today that we are going to be sharing, so take note, those will pop up on your screen during the presentation. And on that note, we are going to be sharing some PowerPoint presentations today, so your screen will go into full screen mode shortly. So feel free to adjust your screen and spotlight or pin Nancy and Shari when they are speaking. How's that sound, everybody? Good? Good so far? All right, great. So welcome today to this event. My name is Jenna Clockley. I am the Director of Membership and Community here at the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce, or CanWCC, as we call it for short, and I am thrilled to be here today for this conversation. My pronouns are she, her, and I welcome you to this event from the unceded and unsurrendered lands of the Anishnabeg, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and home to the Métis Nation, covered in Treaty 1, colonially known as Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce operates out of the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishnabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in what is colonially known as Toronto, Ontario. I want to acknowledge that we face a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people here in Canada. It is hard to find accurate reporting of the actual numbers due to misrepresentation and poor documentation by the RCMP and other police forces across our country. However, the Native Women's Association of Canada puts the number somewhere around 4,000 as of 2016. Every day, we can take action in reconciliation, whether it is sharing what you have learned via the space held for a land acknowledgement whenever you are given a platform, purchasing your products from Indigenous makers and business owners, and supporting the Indigenous economy, or by signing petitions, supporting land defenders, and writing to your members of local, provincial, and federal governments to act on the Truth and Reconciliation calls for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples, or the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Today, I am wearing my Moose Hide campaign pin. Moose Hide campaign is an Indigenous-led grassroots movement of men and boys and all Canadians who are standing up against violence towards women and children. You can find out more about the Moose Hide campaign, and you can order free pins that you can give out to your friends and family. I carry them around in my purse. I hand them out everywhere. They come with this great card that explains the movement and everything that they are doing. And so I'll put the link in the chat for you so you can access those as well. So thank you very much. And now I am honored to introduce and turn the conversation over to Nancy Wilson and Shari Graydon. Nancy Wilson is the founder, CEO, and chief rabble-rouser here at the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. Nancy launched CanWCC in January 2018 out of frustration with the barriers, lack of resources, and difficulty finding connections she experienced as a business owner, and has been working ever since to create a powerful and diverse network through which to drive change and create equity in Canadian business. Nancy is a driven and accomplished feminist entrepreneur who loves learning new things, meeting new people, discussing the philosophical underpinnings of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and watching horror movies. Shari Graydon is an award-winning author, women's advocate, and the CEO and catalyst of Informed Opinions. Since 2010, this national charity has helped amplify the voices of thousands of women across Canada, supporting them in sharing their insights with a broader public. A former newspaper columnist, TV producer, and commentator for CBC Radio and TV, Shari also served as a press secretary to a provincial premier and as the president of Media Watch. So Shari, to kick us off, would you like to share about Informed Opinions and the work that you are doing?
I would indeed, and I'm thrilled to be collaborating with CanWCC and benefiting from this great audience of entrepreneurs that you have assembled. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. As Jenna mentioned, I joined the board of Informed Opinions' predecessor, Media Watch, more than 30 years ago. And at my second board meeting, I went to the bathroom at the wrong time. And when I came back, I was president. And that's probably an issue many of you can relate to because there are no glass ceilings in under-resourced women's organizations, whether they're charities or independent for-profit enterprises. Our mandate at the time was to improve the portrayal and representation of women in the media because at the time, images of women in STEM, for example, were extremely rare and deeply insulting. This was a pitch for a razor product. Meanwhile, against incredible odds, we had our first prime minister who was a woman during the 1993 election, as Kim Campbell battled to retain the position. Reporters regularly commented on her status as a twice divorced woman. And a colleague of mine at the Vancouver Sun had the temerity to ask her dress size because that was clearly a relevant thing for Canadians to know. Media Watch's research in the 1990s found that women were only quoted 1 in 5 times. We made the news more often as victims of violence than in any other category. And although we haven't updated that particular stat, I suspect that remains an ongoing problem, alluded to by Jenna's reminder of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I knew all of these things. And yet a decade later, when I was in Montreal one day, cutting across the parking lot of a Catholic church on René Lévesque with my partner, we came across a streeter TV crew doing street interviews, and they stopped us to say, "The Pope has just died, would you comment?" And I said, "No, I don't think so," and I kept walking. And from behind me, David, who had not been to church in 40 years, he said, "Sure, I'll comment." And I turned around a little concerned about what pearls of wisdom would drop from his beautiful mouth. And I watched him bow his head and gravely declare, "It's a very sad day for Catholics everywhere." And as we continued on our walk to the Old Port, I turned to him and said, "Honey, that was really obvious. And wouldn't it be great if the next Pope came in with a progressive policy on birth control that would not trap millions of poor Catholic women around the world in an endless cycle of childbearing and child rearing?" And David, good feminist that he is, said, "Yeah, Shari, that would have been great. Too bad you turned down the interview." That was painful for a number of reasons. Number one, his comments made the national news. But I'm one of 50% of the population who give birth to everybody. And most women spend decades of our adult lives either trying to avoid becoming pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or dealing with the consequences of having been pregnant, which last forever and change everything. So it matters when one of us is given the opportunity to amplify her voice and we turn it down. That is a sad day for women everywhere. So here's my first polling question for you, which Jenna's going to add. And I'm not sure how this works, Jenna. So will we get to see the results, or you could just share them with us verbally?
Yeah, I'll share the results. We're just waiting we have almost everybody answered right now. Let a couple more trickle in. Okay, let's go with this. There you go. Can everyone see the results? 38% said yes, 26% said no, and 35% said I have not been asked to do a media interview.
Okay. So here's what we know at Informed Opinions from the research that we do is that for many women, when we're asked to weigh in, to speak up at a conference, in a meeting, in all sorts of contexts, sometimes where we go is here. I'm not the best person. And that's almost never the question we get asked. Nobody is saying, are you the best person? And obviously there is no single best person in the first place. My white, heterosexual, cisgendered, city-dwelling, 66-year-old perspective is very differently informed than a queer Indigenous woman living in Cold Lake. So there's no best person, and nobody is ever asking us if we are the best person. It's fair to say that we are constantly reminded as women that we are likely to be held to a higher standard of authority. And so I understand that default, but it's also really important to remember that the place men go when they're asked similar questions it's a very different process. And to be fair, again, this is a reasonable conclusion to draw when you live in a world that has been telling you for centuries that you deserve to be educated, to govern, to lead, to be in charge. But one of the big things we do at Informed Opinions is to encourage women in the training programs we deliver to reframe how they think about the invitations that they receive, whatever they are. And we encourage them to draw a Venn diagram and reflect on what is it that's being asked of me? What is it that I know based on my professional, my personal, my lived experience, and how can I add value? And so then to respond by saying, here's how I can contribute. We all need women to do this. And for the past 15 years at Informed Opinions, we've explicitly been focused on training and motivating and supporting and amplifying and making women with expertise across disciplines, across sectors, across identities, easily findable and supported in sharing their perspectives in the news media. In the process, those women have enhanced public understanding of the issues that they know a great deal about, and they have effectively positioned themselves as go-to sources in their fields as thought leaders, and in the course of doing that, increased their own impact. Many have leveraged their visibility into either regular commentary spots on broadcast or in print or online, or they have been appointed to prestigious panels, influential boards, and indeed the Canadian Senate. So here's my next question. How many of you have ever invested in thought leadership as a means of raising your own profile or that of the organization that you're building or leading?
Almost there. A couple more people to add their feedback.
Can you explain what thought leadership is?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So what I mean by thought leadership is anytime you're weighing in with your informed opinion based on your professional expertise or your lived experience, where you're adding value and helping people to understand and think differently and newly about an issue. So in our world, often that means commentary, written op-eds, which anybody can contribute. Columns are written by people who are employed by the news organization, but opinion pieces or commentaries, those can be submitted by really anybody who's weighing in with an informed opinion on an issue that's generating attention or should be generating attention because it influences so many people and has an impact on a broad swath of the population.
So the results are in. 59% have said yes, they are interested in thought leadership as a means of raising their profile, and 41% said no.
Okay. And I just mentioned legacy media when I was talking about thought leadership, but social media gives you also an enormous opportunity to share your informed opinions in arenas that don't have gatekeepers. So on LinkedIn, anybody can share a post, you can create a newsletter, and we use that on our LinkedIn page, my page personally, and Informed Opinions, to advance and advocate for issues that we care about, and to reinforce our position as an organization that's leading in the particular areas that we do. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I got started in providing thought leadership. It wasn't something that was on my radar 30 years ago, but shortly after I joined the board of Media Watch, I got a phone call from a TV reporter in Vancouver, where I lived at the time, and he called me to say that the Miss Canada pageant had just been canceled, and they needed somebody to come on television and talk about the cancellation of the pageant who was not herself a beauty contestant. Now, he didn't say it exactly like that, but that's absolutely what he meant. And so I qualified. And because I had worked in public relations, I knew that they were probably only going to give me 10 seconds. And I spent some time in advance of the interview thinking about, okay, if I'm only getting 10 seconds, what can I say that is memorable and vivid and embodies my feminist analysis, and do that in 10 seconds? It's a tall order. But I went out into the front steps of my apartment building. I looked into the camera and I said how thrilled I was that a contest treating women's bodies like cattle at an auction was no longer popular enough to support advertisers. I went back into the house, or into my apartment, a couple of hours later. They aired the clip on the news. They used my 10-second soundbite, and I was momentarily elated. And then my ordinarily supportive mother called me on the phone, and she said, "Honey, you looked awful." For the record, I looked fine. It was 30 years ago. I was quite a bit younger, but it was January and I was pale. And in my mother's defense, my 10 seconds was wedged between 10 seconds of Miss Canada 1990 and 10 seconds of Miss Canada 1991. And they were both a decade younger, wearing a lot more makeup, and they were demonstrably beauty queens. And my mother had never noticed that I was not up to scratch before, because I was her daughter. But the point of my story is not that you need to wear a lot of makeup on television, just make sure your mother's out of town. And really what that experience did for me was, because I had way more to say than the 10 seconds they gave me, I channeled the rest of what I knew and thought and felt and understood about the sexual objectification of women in the media, and how portrayal and representation practices continued to underrepresent, or rather undermine, our ability to be taken seriously, to be seen as authoritative. And I channeled that into a 600-word op-ed, or thought leadership commentary piece, which I submitted to the Vancouver Sun, which they published, which generated additional media interview requests, which emboldened me. I started writing anytime I saw something in the news that intersected with my field of knowledge, and contributing op-eds. In fact, I did it so often that finally the Vancouver Sun broke down and gave me a regular column, and that helped lead to additional speaking invitations. And what I found was that the higher profile I had, the easier it was to get people to return my phone calls or my emails, the easier it was for me to generate donations to Media Watch's appeals, the easier it was for me to make change in the direction that I was seeking to do so. And that's really why we started Informed Opinions, was to share the strategies and tools that I've been using for many years now and that are not rocket science, that any woman with an informed opinion who invests a little bit of time in thinking about how she can add value and what she can say to illuminate issues that she's familiar with, how to do that. Because the perspectives that the news media feature help to set agendas, set policy, and influence spending. They have the power to affect everything else, just like politics. In both arenas, it matters who is interviewed, who is quoted, who is profiled, who wields influence, who's at the decision-making table, who tells the stories, and how their life experiences influence the framing. So you're looking at a picture here of Karina Gould. And 6 years ago, this federal cabinet minister returned to work 4 months after becoming the first cabinet minister to give birth while holding office in Canada at the federal level. Like all MPs, she was not eligible for parental leave when her first child was born in 2018. But earlier this year, after her second child, she took 6 months off, still not very long, thanks to legislation that was introduced a year after she had her first child. And only when women are present influencing decisions do we get policies that reflect and meet the needs of the full population. The business case for women, I mean, we're all here because we understand the equity case. And my guess is you probably also know the business case. There is really a truckload of peer-reviewed academic and business research documenting the benefits and the outcomes that occur when women's perspectives are integrated into every decision-making arena. We get better products, improved customer relations, higher ROI, happier workplaces, longer lasting peace treaties, better research, better healthcare, all sorts of dimensions have been measured. And so it's bananas that we're not moving faster to eliminate the barriers to women's advancement in business, in politics, in the media, elsewhere. One other concrete example of why this matters in real life terms. You remember back in 2008 when mortgage lenders' greed led with unprecedented speed to global financial collapse and alarming relapse of the Great Depression, feeding even more suppression of women's rights. In France, the Minister of Finance was asked what could have been done to avoid the ton of damage from which only the wealthiest escaped, and she said, "I must confess, if only Lehman Brothers had had a few sisters, we wouldn't be in this mess." Research backs her up. Scientific studies here and there show hire more women higher up. Plenty are able, and worldwide financial markets will be more stable because where many men take risks for short-term gain, more women consider consequences and long-term pain. Life trains us for that. We learn early that womanhood means lower wages and less respect, that we risk rape and can expect to be blamed for the clothes we wore or the beer we drank. It's not pretty. So let's be frank, in that world, the one we share, men making decisions without our views too often leads to devastating news. In 2018, Informed Opinions upped our research game by collaborating with scientists at Simon Fraser University and building the Gender Gap Tracker, which you can Google it. It shows online every day in real time the ratio of men versus women being quoted in Canada's most influential media. This graph that you're looking at shows the aggregate, but on the website you can see and compare CTV versus Global versus The Star versus the Globe and Mail versus the National Post, which frankly, reliably, is way below everybody else. When we did a deeper dive into the data that we're gathering, we discovered that 60% of the most quoted men and women in Canadian media, legacy media, are politicians. There are some predictable reasons for that, but what it means is that until Equal Voice achieves its mandate of ensuring women are 50% of the population, Informed Opinions cannot achieve our mandate. Not surprisingly, the ratios are about the same. So in Canadian media on a good day, we are about 30%. I just checked earlier this afternoon, and we're 28% today, and we were at 27% in 2018 when we started. So although thousands of women that we've trained and that we feature are being quoted more regularly, there's still a significant gender gap, and it's mirrored by the representation in Parliament, where 70% of MPs are also male. And as Jenna mentioned at the outset, that puts us behind 63 other countries around the world who are doing much better in some cases than we are. Canada, we think we're a beacon of democracy, but we are so not. And our failure to draw on the full talent pool to make tough decisions about the increasingly complex issues that we're dealing with does not serve us. So as Jenna mentioned, we launched earlier this year a Balance the Power campaign. We recruited CanWCC, NOL, Equal Voice, many other national women's organizations across the country, and organizations working for equity more broadly, not just women and the gender binary, but taking into account and understanding that diversity of perspectives across identities is necessary for representation to be truly democratic. We also commissioned a poll 18 months ago asking Canadians how they felt about the fact that we are 64th in the world. Not surprisingly, most of us are not impressed, especially women, gender diverse people, and younger people. However, at the same time, Canadians overwhelmingly understand that gender parity benefits communities, better represents citizens, and also benefits our economy. And we also conducted research into the paths to reaching parity that other countries have taken. And here's what we learned. As is evident from the 64 status, they are no longer a rarity. So Norway, Sweden, Costa Rica, New Zealand, and deeply macho Holy Catholic Mexico, where women make up half of those elected, while we remain inert and ineffective at less than a third. We are not being heard in Canada. And so our pitch to women and allies across the country is that we need to stop asking and insist that change happen. When women fully complement the men, what we know from research is that we get more respectful dialogue, we get more collaboration across party lines, delivering legislation, not leaving folks behind. So parental leave, childcare, birth control, period wear, more support for climate action. That's the kind of traction that we so desperately need. In British Columbia, 53% of the governing caucus are women, and it's no coincidence that BC has delivered free tampons in schools, free women's birth control, and they now facilitate cervical cancer screening at home. So you don't have to book a pap smear, you don't have to have a GP, you can do it at home. That's not a coincidence. And the investment in those kinds of social policy actually pays off economically as well. So for every $1 you invest as a government in birth control, you get a $9 return on investment in terms of savings for healthcare and social services. We accept in this country that Quebec has 22% of the population, and so they get 22% of the seats in Parliament. What doesn't make sense is that we're 50% and we get 30% of Parliament. And, you know, every prime minister in our history has actively appointed cabinet ministers from the prairies, from each coast, from Quebec, because they understand that geographic representation is important. But I am not my postal code. I have more in common with all of you than I do with the other men who live in the condo building I inhabit in Calgary. So other countries have seen and recognized and acted on that, and we can and should too. I'm going to, just spend a couple of minutes talking about what they have done that has made systemic change. There are 5 main strategies. Some countries started early. Northern European countries started 50 years ago, and the fact that they're close to parity is a function of incremental change. Other countries revised their voting system. They went from first past the post, which is what we still have, excuse me, to proportional representation of some kind, and that delivers fair outcomes. Mexico became 4th because they rewrote their constitution, and that's why Mexican women hold half the seats in their federal parliament. Other countries have mandated a minimum number or percentage of seats for women. And then finally, the 5th strategy is to encourage parties to set targets. And that's where Canada sits. And that's why we're 64th. Because some parties do, and some parties don't. Now, maybe in this crowd, you're not getting this particular. I saw, Judy, you were taking a picture. We have all of this stuff about the Balance the Power campaign on our Balance the Power website, including a map I'm going to come to in a second. There's a lot of discourse around quotas and the framing that you can't have quotas and give people opportunities on merit. But the truth is that quotas can improve equality, or rather definitely improve equality, but also quality. So in Norway, they introduced gender quotas on boards. There was deep fear among the business organizations that the board performance would go down, but in fact, more women improved governance and decision-making. And here's my favorite study. In the 1993 municipal elections in Sweden, the quality of elected officials actually improved. Excuse me, just one second. And the researchers who went in before the election happened with the quotas imposed and after determined, and this is their language, they said the reason the quality improved was because imposing quotas eliminated mediocre male candidates. So when parties are forced to recruit women, they don't get rid of their male stars. They recruit really good women, and the men on their roster who were maybe not as effective or high performing or qualified drop off. That makes sense. So in concert with our Balance the Power campaign, we've been meeting with MPs, writing thought leadership, polling Canadians, mobilizing women across the country. On the Balance the Power website, you can trigger an email to 3 levels of government with 1 email by putting in your postal code. It will send it to your MP, your MLA or MNA or MPP, and also to your municipal councillor. So we've been doing that because political parties and governments have the power to fix the problem. They could make change tomorrow if they wanted. And we know that because Rachel Notley demonstrated it in Alberta, not once, not twice, but 3 times. As leader of the NDP in Alberta, she recruited a candidate slate, not cabinet, a candidate slate that was 50% women. And she also ensured that the representation she had in her candidates reflected the racial diversity of the province she sought to lead. That's a stunning commitment that she held herself to. And it's the reason that even in the last election last year, the NDP didn't win, but because Rachel Notley's candidates were 50% women, the overall representation of women in the Alberta legislature jumped from 32% to 38%. Now, Daniel Smith will take credit for that, but she had 0 to do with it. And on our website, you can scroll across a map of Canada and see in your province or territory which parties have what balance in their caucus. And the data is completely illuminating. It's probably relatively predictable as well, but it's a really interesting thing to notice. And if you're inclined to engage your local politicians, you can do that at the federal and provincial level, encouraging them to do better. So here's the URL, but again, if you Google balance the power, it should come up pretty quickly. And I'm going to close just by introducing you to 3 people who drive me. This is my granddaughter, Charlotte. At 9, she is fearless about leaping into the unknown because she has not yet learned that she will be judged for her beauty, not her brains, that she's still likely to be paid less than her male colleagues, that she has a 1 in 4 chance of being sexually assaulted. In my lifetime, I would really like to be able to say that I helped address those issues at a systemic level by ensuring women's voices hold a balance of power in this country. And this is Charlotte's brother, Sam, communing with the family's newest addition, Harrison. And I would also like Sam and Harrison to grow up in a world and remain as sensitive and loving as they are now, not to equate masculinity with the need to dominate, and to be inspired, not threatened, by strong women like Charlotte and all of you.
Thank you so much, Shari. I'm literally crying right now after those 2 slides and what you said about your granddaughter. But it's Q&A time. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come off mute. We've got Nancy and Shari Graydon here, and we had some great questions that were submitted earlier. You know, one of the questions we had submitted, let me just find it here.
Let me jump in while
Nancy.
Jenna dries her eyes a little bit and gets organized. I thank you so much, Shari. That was so wonderful, and I really appreciate all the stats. I love the data. I love to consume data. It outrages me, but anger fuels me. So and it brought to mind a couple things. So one is that politics are, may not be something that a lot of business owners pay that much attention to. Some people are more interested than others, but I really think that it is so important that as a business owner, as a woman business owner, that you make an effort to engage in politics, in what's going on, voting, and the policies that affect you, as well as some of the really critical policies that exclude you, because those policies can really help your business, or if you're excluded, can really contribute to some of the barriers that you face as a woman business owner. So it's those policy barriers that represent a lot of the advocacy that we do at CanWCC. We do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the research side of things, but I do think that if you're a woman business owner and you're not engaging somewhat in what's going on in politics, you're really only getting half your story on a strategic level. And the other thing is, when you were talking about folks, sort of women not getting asked relevant things, it reminded me of in 2021, we were asked to testify twice in front of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. This was the budget that came out with the daycare announcement. It was touted as the first feminist budget in Canada. And this was the first federal budget in response to the 2020 pandemic lockdown, which all the reports were saying, quite rightly, disproportionately affected women and certainly women business owners. So the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce is invited to testify pre-budget and post-budget in front of the House of Commons Finance Committee. The first time around, I got asked one question, and it was about daycare. The second time around, I was prepared, and I said in my initial opening statements, I know I'm invited here probably just to speak about daycare, but we actually have a lot more to say. And once I said that in my opening statements, I got some pretty irritable questions coming from some of the Liberal MPs who clearly, in my opinion at least, didn't seem to be as friendly as they were the first time around, because I was clearly there to not talk about the economic impacts, not talk about anything in the budget except daycare. So I firmly believe if there are more women sitting on that finance committee, we're going to be asked more questions of substance. And as a Chamber of Commerce, we have more to talk about than daycare. So.
Good for you.
Yes, Nancy. Oh, sorry, Shari, to interrupt. Continue.
I was just going to say good for you for being explicit and articulating that, you know, as just because you're capable of being a mother doesn't mean to say that's your focus or your preoccupation or even your desire to speak to.
That leads perfectly into our first question, which is business and politics go together like a tight sweater. How can we get more founders to leverage their skills and business to advance social justice?
Well, I think, you know, becoming engaged in the spaces where that work is happening. When we were recruiting allies for the Balance the Power campaign, I had somebody else working on that piece, and I don't know how much success other than CanWCC she had in engaging business organizations to participate. And I think in the context of business, there is an perhaps predictable resistance to the idea of quotas because of the discourse around merit. And so that might have been one of the obstacles, although we weren't and haven't been explicitly saying Canada needs to impose quotas. We're really just wanting the issue to be addressed in concrete ways because there are many options. So I am not in the business world, but I suspect that some governments are more inclined to listen to people advocating for something when those people are operating in an arena that generates capital as opposed to like a non-profit organization is seeking donations. And so identifying yourself as a business owner when you're speaking to politicians, when you're writing to MPs, or when you're engaging in public discourse and talking about the richness of your concerns in the way that Nancy, you said you did it at the parliamentary committee, those are probably all really good strategies.
Okay, we got a question in the chat from Christine, and Christine has asked, other than politics, what are other ways that we can maintain the pressure, especially given the rollback on DEI and the backlash that seems to be coming?
Well, I would say anybody who is on any social media platform, that's one place where there's no gatekeeper. You can post as often and as much and about whatever you want as possible. And I think that the rollback on DEI is significant and real. And the wave that is washing over the border from the US in terms of American politicians who are really dismissive of that is having a huge impact. So I know here in Alberta, the universities that had, and maybe still have, but had dedicated spaces and offices devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion, were told that the government would be deducting the funds, any funds they spent on DEI, would be deducted from their provincial allotment of funding. So that's serious. And I think being on social media and speaking to the benefits and the realities and the value of ensuring that we're getting perspectives from across identities and geographies and disciplines is really important.
Christine, I see you're on camera. Did you want to say anything?
Yeah, we've seen similar things here. I sat on in an EDI role on my alumni network, and they've just done away with the role, and it's just really disappointing. I don't know if anybody's read the book Backlash by, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was about on the back of the last wave of feminism. It just feels like history's repeating itself, and it makes me nervous. So thank you for this. It was an amazing presentation, and I'm really glad that we're still looking for ways to make a difference. Yes, Susan Faludi, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've got another question here from Sarah Elder, who is with Madam Premier. If you don't know, check them out. And the question is, the space of politics and business is filled with minefields, and you need to be prepared for that. What do you think about that statement?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. But you know, yes, anytime you want to do something of consequence, there are going to be, like, if you don't want to be inconsequential, there are going to be consequences to engaging. And whether it's politics or media, thought leadership, or somebody out there leading a business, but the alternative is to be inconsequential. And, you know, my guess is that all the women in this Zoom room are interested in making a difference in one way or the other. And so, yeah, there are risks. And I've been getting hate mail for 30 years. I'm sure Judy has had her share. And Nancy, you probably do too. We're still here.
I told my partner when I started the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce, I'll know we're getting somewhere when I start getting hate mail and death threats. And we're not quite there yet. So it's something that I shouldn't trivialize, and I'm not trivializing. I do think that it's something that turns away a lot of people, a lot of women and other underrepresented people from participating in politics, particularly because of the ability to spread information online, to be so hateful online. And it's something that you know, can put not only themselves but their families in jeopardy. So it's not something that I would know how to make that decision myself. It's a difficult one.
You know, it's interesting. Of course, having a public profile, especially in politics, does make you a target. But one of the things that I keep coming back to is that social media and online hate is no less a problem in Mexico than it is here. And have 50% women in their legislatures because they did a systemic approach to changing that. And when there are 50% women in the room, people behave better. So that's talking about the actual parliamentary space. But when women are seen and accepted in roles of authority, like the more of us there are, the less likely we are to be targeted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Judy, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I have gotten my share of hate mail. You just learn to ignore it, basically. But it is true that a lot of women in local politics are leaving politics because of it. And this hate mail, a lot of this hate mail is not actual hate mail. It's like bots. I've talked to some techie guys, and they say, like, you can be in your, you know, in your basement and just massively attack people with emails that seem to be coming from different people. So, but I just want to take a step back from that. One of the things that strikes me is the stats, right? Like when I was president of the National Action Committee on Status of Women, there were 18% women in parliament, and now there's 30%. And that is not, given how much everything's changed, that is not a good change, right? That's not good enough. But where I do see changes in leadership of social movements right across the board. So in the places where there isn't as much power, the impact of feminism is much clearer than in the places where there is power, right? And that's the problem we have, that the power in our society is still very patriarchal. And I wonder, and all of the ways that we've learned how to challenge it just aren't working in that way. So at that level, right? Whether it's in business, whether it's in venture capital, whether it's in politics. And I just wonder, one, if you've thought about that, like what new strategies could we have to challenge that, the way that power is exercised? Like, and then secondly, I wonder in Mexico, I don't know enough about it, are the politics changing? Or are there women adapting to the patriarchal system? That's the other problem that we have, right? Like Daniel Smith.
Yeah, not every woman is going to be a good leader, just like not every man is, going to be an abuser. So I also don't know deeply enough what's happening in Mexico. It's a relatively new experiment. And when I first heard about the fact that they'd rewritten their constitution to enable this, somebody suggested to me that what they had done was they ended up recruiting the female relatives of a bunch of men who would have otherwise run. And so they put their wives or their daughters up in their stead. But then I also heard that from a researcher who has done a lot of work in Latin, Central America and Mexico, because many of the Latin American countries are also way ahead of us. And that what has happened is that when you give women power, even if they started out as a puppet, or that was the desire of the man who put them forward, when the women have power and they get to see the insides of those patriarchal structures and how disenfranchised and marginalized they are, they get radicalized, some of them. And so I think it's an experiment that is still, happening and unfolding in real time. But looking at what other countries did to make those changes really convinced me that quotas are a reasonable thing for us to consider. And it's complicated because we don't have just a gender binary. We do have gender diverse people, and we also have Indigenous people who are really underrepresented. But some of the countries that have quota systems have quotas designated for Indigenous populations as well, because they recognize that representation is fundamental to democracy. And, I don't know that there's one single way to make politics change, but it's easier to make politics change, as Rachel Notley showed, than it is to, make every C-suite or board of directors in the corporate sector up their game. Although quotas imposed on the corporate sector in Northern Europe have also really made a big difference.
Thank you, everyone, for this engaging Q&A. We'll hopefully have time at the end for Q&A, but I also put a link in the chat so you can join and continue this conversation in our Q&A, or conversation about balance the power and informed opinions and getting involved in media and politics and why that is important over on our circle. It is free to join. We'd love to have you get on over there and hang out with us. And I want to hand it over to Nancy so she can share some of the advocacy work that we have completed over about the last 6 months. There is a huge swath of things that we have done that have just been incredible. So Nancy, I'd love for you to take it away.
Thank you. So I'll try to make this relatively brief because I know we were, so we can maybe return to some questions or a conversation. Can everyone see my screen? Yes? Cool. So collective impact. So I just wanted to mention that we're still using the word advocacy just because it's hard to change your vocabulary entirely. But what we are doing at the organization is, so CanWCC as a Chamber of Commerce, our main activity is advocacy on behalf of our members. But advocacy is really has quite a top-down approach to it. And so we're moving towards more of a theory of collective impact. And although from the beginning we've had, a membership department and an advocacy department, and it's kind of like the two wings of our organization, in the last year or so, we've actually built out a new strategy, and that strategy is focused on collective impact. And what we've done is we've actually broken down the advocacy department, and instead, what we have done is focused on really integrating advocacy or collective impact into everything the organization does. So all departments, all of our operations, all of our events, all of our data gathering, everything we do is strategically a part of that collective impact, like strategic objective. And again, moving from that advocacy concept to collective impact, the strategy is the foundation of that strategy is the idea that we don't have the answers to these issues or questions. You, the members, do. And so we come from a place of asking the questions, seeking the information, and we listen to what you're telling us. And that's how we are building collective impact and activating, the wisdom of our community to make that happen. So going forward, we're trying to make that shift from advocacy to collective impact, and we hope that you will you'll come along for the ride. So in the last 6 months, 8 months, a little bit longer, we've been to the International Women's Day Women's March in Toronto. I have some updates on the BDC legislative review, which we had a special town hall about last March. We also put out a report through one of our grant projects called the Economic Equity Alliance, and we are launching a new program called Flip the Script. So here's just a cute picture of folks at the IWD March. On the left, you can see Petra. She's here at this event. Okay, BDC legislative review. So last February, March, I believe it was early March, we had a special town hall where we invited members and talked about the legislative review. So every 10 years, the federal government is required to review the BDC Act, and so the Business Development Bank of Canada is governed by a piece of legislation. That legislation is reviewed, as well as the activities of the Business Development Bank of Canada in that 10-year period. And then ISED, which is the ministry that governs the BDC, which is Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. They write up a report, it goes to Parliament, and then the BDC presumably responds. So we collected feedback from our members. We put out a public report, as well as submitted a brief to ISED with our recommendations and the feedback our community gave us during that special town hall. So during the intermediate time, the ISED did put out their report. That was in November of 2023. And then in May 2024, or I guess it was just the end of April, we received this very nice letter from the BDC thanking us for participating in the process and letting us know that they have put together their plan to integrate the recommendations that ISED had made. So let's review. So on the left are the recommendations that came out of our town hall and that we submitted as part of our BDC legislative review brief. Then we have the ISED report. What did they come up with? And then finally, what did the BDC report say that they're going to do? And everything was addressed, which is really fantastic. And I'm really not cherry picking here. I mean, there were obviously complaints and some issues that were brought up as feedback about experiences with the BDC, individual experiences that came up during that special town hall. Obviously, individual complaints were not addressed in these larger reports. But what, in terms of our recommendations and the feedback coming from our community, they were pretty much in line with the review that that ISED had, which of course was presumably their own analysis as well as a aggregation of the analysis from stakeholders. So this is good news, I think. So we'll keep an eye on that. Okay, the Economic Equity Alliance. So Judy Rebick, who's here, is an advisor with the Economic Equity Alliance, which is a grant project that has been going on for the past 2 years. And it is it's an alliance of 12 organizations that we've put together that all represent and work with self-employed individuals. And these organizations don't necessarily always work together. So we've got chambers of commerce, we've got labor unions, other feminist organizations. And the group came together to advocate on behalf of self-employed individuals, specifically around the dearth of small business policy supporting the self-employed. So the group ran focus groups last November and December. We took that information and put it together with other research and launched this report, Invisible Entrepreneurs, the Impact of Small Business Policy Neglect on Self-Employed Individuals. This was launched in March of this year at a press conference that we held in Ottawa. And it was also debuted by Petra at Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub event in Ottawa as well. So the next screen that I have, or the next slide, actually has a clip from the press conference. One of the organizations was the National Collective of Women in Business, which is a group of, it's a campus-based group for young women, some of them students in business. And so the representative, Navya Bharati, is fantastic. She was super involved in all levels of the alliance and putting together this putting together the report. She traveled to Ottawa to participate in the press conference, and this is one of the social media clips that actually we have. The Lisa from FTP Media, I think, is actually at this event as well. She produced these clips for social media. So no, okay, that's the next clip. Sorry, got to hold your breath a little bit longer. This is a quote. This is, I think, the best quote from the report, which is when we say the data we collected demonstrates that the lack of support for self-employed workers stems from systemic gender and race discrimination. So that's the kind of hard-hitting report that that comes out when you hire Judy Rebick as a coalition builder. And I love it. I love this kind of stuff. So this is this was our conclusion, and it also shaped our recommendations, of course. So here is Navya.
My name is Navya Barati, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Collective of Women. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated towards amplifying the voices of students working towards gender equity across Canadian campuses. We were honored to join the Alliance, especially to represent the needs of students that turn to self-employment as a means of supporting themselves in their education. Public policy discussions about small businesses, however, consistently focus on employers and formally waged employees with benefits. The Alliance's report shows how this excludes 10% of Canadian businesses and workers who are self-employed, making it harder for them to survive, make a living, and grow their businesses. Apart from 80% of women entrepreneurs being self-employed, more than half of Black and Indigenous entrepreneurs are self-employed. 25% of all self-employed individuals also are people of color. And the lack of policy considerations for self-employed people exacerbates the barriers that marginalized communities must overcome for meaningful participation in the economy. For many marginalized individuals, self-employment is more than just a platform for pursuing innovative ideas beyond traditional employment. It's a necessity fueled by various intersecting factors like gender, race, geographic location, and socioeconomic status. A recent RBC small business survey revealed that younger millennial and Gen Z generations are spearheading a micro-entrepreneur economy, which entails starting small businesses to combat rising inflation and digitization. And as young people are increasingly turning towards self-employment to support themselves, it is critical for the government to respond accordingly to design policies that will build a more inclusive Canadian economy.
That was great. All right. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is Flip the Script, which is our program that we are launching. We're collecting applications for this program right now. All right. So it addresses the problem of access to capital. So women, you know, I'm telling you what you already know, but just bear with me. Women own 30% of businesses across Canada, or co-own 30%. They only get about 3% of venture capital funds. When you look at debt financing, on average, 15% of business loan applications are rejected. For women loan applicants, that number jumps up to 22%. So, big surprise to everyone in the room, access to capital is a big problem, right? We all know that. These are the stats that I give when I do radio interviews. So, because people don't, outside of like outside of this room, at least, some people really don't know that these statistics are real. So the program is based on a piece of research by Dana Cans, and she's an organizational psychologist, and her team found that one of the reasons that drives that gender gap is unconscious bias among investors. So she found that venture capitalist investors ask women and men founders very different types of questions. So she would ask men founders, not she, not the researcher, venture capitalists tended to ask male founders sort of positive sounding questions like, how are you going to handle sales volumes? How are you going to change the industry? Essentially, how are you going to make me money? They'll ask women founders, on the other hand, how are you going to manage risks in the industry? And essentially, you know, how do I know that you're not going to lose my money? So those lines of questioning create very different pictures of potential for investment for VCs, right? And VCs want to make money. They don't want to break even, and they certainly don't want to lose money. So this unconscious bias drives a fair amount of the statistically significant amount of the difference in investment outcomes. And well, it's not changing. Oh, here we go. So what it showed was that as the sort of negative focused questions, sorry, I'm not going to focus on what this says because I didn't actually create this slide. I'm just going to continue talking. So as the two lines of questioning continue, you have different outcomes. The good news is the research also points towards different techniques and mechanisms that can be used to disrupt that unconscious bias and change the story, change the narrative that the founder is presenting to the investor. So these are skills that this Flip the Script program teaches so that you as a founder, as an entrepreneur, can take control of the conversation and actually kind of flip it in a way that is most advantageous to you while still respecting the questions you're being asked. And again, what the research found is that if you use these skills effectively, you can not only increase your chance of getting investment, but increase the dollar amount by about 60%. So the program itself, we're offering it in English and French to 600 women and non-binary business owners across Canada. The program for the moment is free because it's funded by a grant from the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy. And the program consists of 3 interwoven components. So there's skills-based course, which is self-paced, and it's online, so that's where you learn the skills that I'm referring to. Once you learn those skills, you have access to an AI-enabled piece of software where you can practice those skills in these simulation scenarios. So you can choose to be talking to a loan officer about getting debt financing or talking to angel investors. And because of the AI built in, the loan officer or the angel or VC investors that are sitting in front of you on the screen are actually asking you questions that are specifically tailored to your business because you input that information beforehand. So it's not just a list of generic questions. You're really in a simulation that is much more tailored to what real life is going to look like. And then following that, you actually get quite sophisticated data and feedback on your questions. Did you apply the techniques correctly? What can you improve? That kind of thing. And throughout the entire program, all the participants are going to be organized into small 6 to 9 person peer groups that they'll meet with every 2 weeks with a professional facilitator. So these groups are going to anchor you through the program. So the course is self-paced, practicing with the simulator software. You decide how often you do that, but we don't want people just kind of floating in space, participating in the program. Those peer groups anchor you with real people, a real meetup time, so you can grow your network, support each other through the process, and support each other while you're trying to get funding, which is hard enough. So this is just an illustration of what I just said. Beyond the Control the Conversation course, which is the key skills-based course, we also have 2 bonus courses that we're including in the program. One is for you to refine your pitch if you need that. We also have a business financing course for folks that are interested in that. These are bonus optional courses. They're included. Who is eligible for the program? Women and non-binary business owners in Canada. This is for folks that are well beyond the sort of brainstorming phase. You got a business, you're actively seeking investment, or you're planning to do so in the next year or so. And because of the AI component of the technology, you need a computer, a laptop, or a Chromebook. You need mic and webcam and a pretty decent connection to the internet. So anybody on this call has what they need in terms of tech. So here are the dates. We're accepting applicants for both cohorts right now. If you want to participate in the summer cohort, which starts in July, the application deadline is June 7th. If you want to participate in French, the French component of the course will only be offered for the fall cohort. So, but you have a much longer application window for the fall cohort. Application, multiple choice, takes like 3 to 4 minutes, really straightforward. And this is where you can find out more information, sign up for an info session. We're having them every 2 weeks. And on this website, you can also apply. So I think that is the fastest I've ever gotten through anything, because normally I'm just rambling on here, pontificating on this, but yes. Any questions? You gotta help me,
can't
Jenna.
believe
I
it.
can't see anything.
No, I mean, people are asking, someone was like, can I participate anywhere? And yes, you can. This is a virtual program. So like Nancy had said, if you have a computer and the internet access and a microphone, this is a program for you. And we'd really love your help to share this program. We are looking for 600 entrepreneurs across the country. So I put a link in there. We've got our a social media kit for you to make it as easy as possible for you to put this up on your Instagram, on your LinkedIn, wherever you can, to let people know that this program is available and for free this year. 600 people. So we can do, if there's anything you have in mind, like, hey, I have a group of like 20 people that might want to know, send us an email. We'll figure it out. We'll get you the information you need to know and like share about this program and the research. Really, these statistics are like mind-blowing. Does anybody else have any questions about Flip the Script or anything else that we're doing at the Chamber or have done over the past couple of months? You can come off mute and ask it if you want. I'm looking in the chat right now. Oh yeah, Kathleen applied. Great work, Kathleen. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for saying you will share it. We appreciate it. And all of this, there's an exit survey when you leave. Please fill out the exit survey, because if you want to share, Flip the Script, you just click a box there and we will get you that information as well directly to your inbox. Ooh, Christine, yes. Melanie, thank you for sharing that. Any questions? We still have Shari here and Nancy here. And if not, I can see people are ready to go. It's end of day. We have a lot of events coming up at the Chamber. So June 11th, we have community networking. June 13th, we have Leaving a Lasting Impression, Unleashing Your Legacy Potential, which is hosted by one of our business members. We have a session on elevating your leadership presence. And we're doing a Growing Your Business AMA with the founder and CEO of VUCA Works, Heather Fraser. So we have also over $10,000 of discounts for our members inside the circle from trusted partners. So there's so much going on inside the circle and inside of our membership. And just thank you everyone for being here. We need your voice. We need you here. And and thank you for allowing the Chamber to amplify your voice and your needs, because that is what we're here for, to amplify the voices of diverse women and non-binary entrepreneurs. And it's events like this that help us connect to you and the work that you do. There's some things in here I'm seeing in the chat, but you're the ones out there putting in the work every day, right? On the front lines of this. So, your voice matters. And the more of us there are in the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce, the harder we are to ignore. So please join us, become a member. You can join our free community circle. If there's any financial barriers barriers for you. So I'm going to paste some links into the chat, and I want to give anybody time. Does anybody want to come off mute, say something? We got about 5 minutes left.
Yes, I'd like to say something. Thank you, Shari. Actually, that was really good. I'm an RN. I've worked in long-term care for 30 years, and all the problems that are having in long-term care wouldn't be there if they just asked the women professionals that are working in the field what the solutions are, because I could tell the ministry what the solution is to the problems we've been crying about since I started as a nurse, all those years ago. And they're saying now, because COVID came about, and then, all these things came up, but, because the majority of the healthcare professionals are women, and the leadership is still male dominant, but directors of care, they're females, but our voices aren't heard, so it's really great, and all the work that Nancy advocates for us, and listening to you to speak, Shari, it's really, it resonates with me, and it's so amazing that we're coming together as a community, and fighting for these approaches, and I hope that they could find a solution for healthcare, because the need is so great.
Sounds like a thought leadership opportunity, Kathleen. You're the
Yep. Sounds good.
Okay, well, everyone, thank you so much for being here. We had over 40 people here today, and it's just been so great to be together. And Shari, thank you so much for your contributions here today. And thank you for everything that you are doing with Informed Opinions and Balance the Power. If you're interested, Informed Opinions has media training courses. They have them up on their website, and they run them throughout the year. So please go check that out if that's something that you want to get into. And as always, you can email me if you need anything. You can find me in the circle. I'll put my email in the chat, jenna@canwcc.ca. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Nancy, for sharing everything. Appreciate you. And thanks everybody for coming. Let's come off mute and say bye to each other.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.